What if our youth can grow up conscious and resilient? What tools would allow our children to be thriving and joyful? Welcome to the Growing Up Conscious Show with Kathleen Connor. So welcome back to the Growing Up Conscious Show. I'm your host, Kathleen Connor. And after raising my sons and being a special education teacher is what they call it in public schools for more than 25 years, while also studying consciousness and energetic body work, I created this podcast for people ages 2 to 202 who are engaged in creating a conscious, aware, joyful life and living. And since I mentor families and speak at schools about youth empowerment and resilience and youth consciousness, essentially, one of my targets for the show is for both youth and adults to have the tools at a younger age or any age to consciously create the life they desire. So today I have a friend of mine that I actually know through Access Consciousness. We both are on what Access Consciousness, if you haven't heard of it, is an international company. And so I've met people from all over the world with working through this company. And one of the things that I love to do for Access is make phone calls for them to check in and see if people need support and also help with customer service. So on the global calling team, I got to meet today's guest. So today's guest is actually living in Brazil. So speaking of being someplace different in the world. And her name is Louise, and let's see if I can get this, Janauys. So hello, Louise. Nice to have you on.
Don't worry, like everybody in Brazil, it's really funny actually with my name. I got used to, if I get that they're talking to me, I'll answer, because even Louise for Brazil is not very common. So they tend to get my name kind of interesting.
I bet.
If I know you're talking to me, I'm good.
Yeah, so Louise, part of the reason why I thought it'd be fun to interview you is you found out about some of the consciousness tools that I found out about maybe like 11 or 12 years ago, but you discovered them at a younger age while you were in your 20s. I was doing some other consciousness training in my 20s, but you found out about the Access Consciousness tools in your 20s and like jumped right in. So can you tell us a little bit about like what brought you in your life to the point where you had the interest in consciousness and you then chose the things that you did?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually love talking about this because you said I found Access when I was in my 20s, and people always say, "Oh my gosh, I wish that I was that young." And now I have little kids in my classes, like 7 years old, 11 years old, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I wish I was in Access so young." But yeah, well, basically, so both my parents are doctors, and my mom has always had this kind of like holistic approach, like all of her during all of her life. And so, even though she was like a doctor, she would still look for like alternative treatments and stuff like that. And so, I grew up curious about all of that. And so I studied about herbs, and I studied about like tarot and like anything. And then when I was around, I think 23 or something, we started doing like coaching trainings. So I'm actually like a training coach with personal and professional coach, and positive psychology as well. But there was still something that was kind of like missing. I had the theory, but there was something that just like I wasn't really happy, to be honest. I had what people would call like the perfect life. I had a good job. I lived in a nice part of town with my fiance. We had a dog. I had my car. Everything was doing great, you know, like everything was okay. But I was like, really? Is this my life? I'm going to work and pay my bills and that's it. And there was no fun really in my life. And I was working so many hours and all that. And it got to a point where and I know this is very common in Access, but it got to a point where I was like, what is it even worth? Like, is it even worth to be alive just to go to work and pay your bills every day? And that's when I started watching YouTube videos, like about Ho'oponopono and all of that kind of stuff. And I came across a video from a Brazilian facilitator. She was a bars facilitator back then, and she was talking about bars. And I don't even really know how that video showed up. It just showed up, and I was
Well,
like, oh,
let's take a minute though, because you brought that
yeah,
up. The bars in Access Consciousness is actually energetic body work. It has to do with points on the head that when you touch them, you release energy. That's a simple way to explain it. And it's been shown to release anxiety and depression and stress and many different things now that they've done more research on it. But when she says the bars, because I've had friends make fun of me saying, the bars, what are you talking about? The Access bars essentially are these bars on your head that is an energetic body work that you learn when you get trained with Access. Thanks. Keep going.
yeah. Thank you. I always forget that not everybody in the world knows what the bars are. But yeah, so there was this video on YouTube of this lady that I had never heard of talking about Access consciousness and the Access bars. And I live in Northeast Brazil, so it's far from like São Paulo and Rio, the bigger cities. And I had no idea of anyone in my area that had ever like done bars or anything like that. But I was interested. And so I started going on the Access Consciousness website. Um, and I found a bar class 4 hours away from where I live. And I was like, you know what? That's close enough. I'm going. And actually, before that, like in between the video and the class, I found a guy like randomly that he had taken one bars class. He had never practiced, but he was like, okay, I'll run your bars. Like he had only practiced during the class and then never again. And I found him and he was like, yeah, I'll run your bars. And so I got to run my bars, I think 2 or 3 times before the class. And during that time, I just watched every YouTube video that I could find on the subject. And I learned the Access Consciousness mantra and all that. And at that point, I had no intention of being a bars facilitator or even like working with the bars. I was just looking to find some joy in my life because that was really missing. And by the time the class ended, I was like, oh my gosh, I just found like a possibility that I had never considered before. And within 6 months, I was a bars facilitator. And now 4 years later, I'm a certified facilitator with Access Consciousness.
And what that means for people that are not familiar with the structure of Access Consciousness is, as a bars facilitator, you can teach the class to other people. Yeah. So like, for instance, myself, if somebody came to me and said I wanted to learn the bars, I could teach them how to do that. And then a certified facilitator, there's a bunch of other classes that are not focused on energetic body work, but more like clearing your beliefs, clearing your limitations, clearing any points of view that get in the way of you being totally conscious and aware. So there's a lot of sit-down classes as well. So as a certified facilitator, Louise can also teach what's called like the foundation and other other classes. So she's done the training to do both, essentially. And so with that, you know, I noticed back when I was facilitating the class called the Foundation in Access, every time I did that with a group of people, I would have new ahas and new awarenesses about what tools worked well and which ones were like so easy that people don't use them, you know. So
Yeah.
when you think of your process and you think of what people, even if they only watch this video and nothing else, and they never even looked up access consciousness, what are some things that you started using right away that you feel like it would be easy to share with somebody?
Awesome. Well, actually, what actually made me want to take the class was because I was already using some of the tools that I learned through YouTube and all that, and that were already working for me, you know. So probably the biggest one, and that I have been using my whole life ever since, every day, is like, who does this belong to? So basically, this tool, for anyone who have never heard of it before, is basically, a lot of our thoughts and feelings and emotions, they are not ours. We think they are, but we are actually just aware of other people's feelings, thoughts, and emotions, and even pain in your body. And that's what it was for me. Like, I was always constantly in pain on my lower back, and I had a lot of headaches and stuff like that. And so when I learned this tool, every time I would feel the pain in my body, I would ask, okay, is this mine? Who does this belong to? And then I would just get this sense of lightness and wow, and all of a sudden it doesn't hurt. And so, I started playing with that tool a lot, and I got so much better. And actually, my mom has fibromyalgia, and she has gotten so much better after using Access tools as well. So that was a big one. And then the Access Consciousness mantra.
Yeah.
So
So
all of
let's start with the who does this belong to, because that's such I love that one as well. And it was funny because when I was in elementary school, for a while I started limping and like using a scooter to go to school. Like I couldn't walk normally, right? And they couldn't ever figure out what that was, right? I was pretty young and I barely remember it. So I remember asking my mom before she passed away, I'm like, what do you think that was? She goes, I think you were really feeling bad for another kid in your class who had some physical ailments, and she's even like not even that aware of the tool who this belonged to, but she goes, I think you were just sympathetic of another kid in your class. And I'm like, oh, it just kind of rang the bell for me that, oh, from a very young age, because my dad had a lot of digestion issues and what they called ulcerative colitis and all that. And I used to go to school like bent over with stomach pain at time. And I didn't know as a kid to say, wow, is this mine or somebody else's? Because you don't even need an answer. I wouldn't even need to know that it was my father's. But as long as you know to ask that, whether it's thought, feeling, emotion, or a body pain, then it gives you more conscious choice about how to interact with it, because sometimes when I ask who does this belong to, and it's light that it's not mine, it doesn't mean it goes away right away. But I do say to my body, hey, body, thanks for this awareness, but let's not take on other people's stuff. It doesn't help them. It doesn't help you. Thank you for letting me know that this person is feeling this, but now we can return it to sender, and let's let go of trying to heal them, because quite a few people, their bodies automatically attempt to heal the bodies around them, especially if they're parents or siblings, or even like I walked into a classroom when I was teaching elementary, bent down to talk to a second grader. My knee hurt, and it's a knee that doesn't normally hurt, right? So I remember to say, who does this belong to? Again, you don't need to know who it belongs to, but I looked over at the teacher and she had just gone through knee surgery. And that's how sensitive some of our bodies can be to the bodies around us. And same thing with the thoughts, feelings, emotions, like you said. So it's so simple that most people don't use this tool, but it's one that's come in handy so many times. Right?
Yeah.
And then go ahead and talk about the Access Consciousness mantra. What's something that you use that for and what it is?
Well, I started using it a lot while I was driving because I don't really enjoy driving. I used to say, like, even before Access, I used to say that I drive because it's better than taking the public transport. And so I was like, okay, how can I make this easier and more enjoyable for me? And so what I started doing was doing the Access Consciousness mantra while I was driving.
Can you
And
say what the mantra is for people who don't know?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So all of life comes to me with ease and joy and glory. And if you want to hear it in Portuguese, is tudo na vida vem a mim com facilidade, alegria e glória.
Oh, nice.
So now you know something in Portuguese. Yeah. And so I started driving. Like every time I would get in the car, I would start repeating the mantra, and it got a lot easier for me to drive, and even enjoyable, I would say. And you know, with like the rush hour and all that, at that time, I was still working at a travel agency, actually. So I was an exchange student when I was 16, and when I came back, I worked for a travel agency. Well, one of the jobs that I did was working for a travel agency and to send students to study abroad, and so I would drive there and back home every day, and it was usually the rush hour, and that would drive me nuts. And so yeah, that was probably one of the first times that I started using the mantra, and then for everything else, like all day long, just all of life comes to me with ease and joy and glory.
Yes. Yeah. That's interesting because when I hear now that I live in Florida, I usually start my day by walking on the beach. If I can get down there in time, it'll be for sunrise, right? Because I like the barefoot time. I like the water, the wind, the sun, everything. But my mind can still be busy with the things that I have to do for the day. So just walking down the beach, sometimes I'll be like, "Oh, life comes to me with ease, joy, and glory," you know. And then I'll throw in other words like, even though these are all related to life, but all money comes to me with ease, joy, and glory. All relationships come to me with ease, joy, and glory. So it's one of those things where it's if you can't always get your thoughts, feelings, and emotions out of your head, that you can kind of replace them with something that is what you want to be telling yourself instead of like the blah, 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 you know, that can go on, that can go on all the time. So when you were using these, like who does this belong to and the mantra, what did you notice changing in your life?
Well, one of the things was probably that I was less cranky. Because I was never a morning person, and yet I had to wake up early every day to go to work, and so I would usually wake up really cranky, um, and it would take me maybe a couple hours to be a decent person. So that started changing, and I guess the biggest thing that I noticed at the time, like I had a lot of big changes after that as well. But the first thing that I noticed was at my job, because like I love the people that I was working with, and I liked working there, but just like the hours and some of boring stuff, like bureaucratic stuff, like contracts and stuff like that. I never liked it. And it was really funny because my boss called me and he was like, you know what? I think you might be more useful doing something else. And so he took me off of the things that I didn't like very much. And he put me to go to like events. They were usually at night, when I'm happier. and and so I would basically go to events and talk about the company and the exchange programs we offered and all that, which was something that I enjoyed a lot more than sitting on a desk all day. And money flows also started increasing because they had a policy where even if you weren't the person who closed the deal, if you were the first to greet the client and give them like the first presentation, then the commission of that sale would go to you. And that first part I enjoyed. The thing that I didn't enjoy was the closing because of all the contracts and all the numbers and all that. And so what started happening was that I was having a lot of first meetings with clients, and then actually my boss would do the closing, but the commission would come to me.
Nice,
So
nice.
yeah, so those were the things. Like I was a lot happier on the job, and money flow definitely increased.
Yeah, there's a lot I learned about changing my points of view about money from these tools. Like I'd already worked on that quite a bit, but I didn't realize I was still coming from a little bit of a victim mentality with money instead of total conscious choice, you know. So there's still times when I don't have as much as I'd like to have, but I know it's a choice if I'd like to be doing more that brings in money or do like I know that, you know, like sometimes when people ask me about money, I'll be like, well, now at this point, I know that there's at least 10, 20, maybe 500 ways I could receive money. And I have less point of view of like that I'm not going to do certain things and I will do others. So it just really expanded my points of view about how to receive money without defining it so much. You know? um, and that natural flow, like you said, you were kind of asking for ease, joy, and glory. Then your boss moved you to a job you preferred more, and then that also led to receiving more money. You know, so what else is possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And even with me like leaving the company, because and all of that occurred during the pandemic. Because I took my first bars class in January 2020, and I took my second class in March, like 1 week before everything closed down. And so it actually took me a few months before I was able to take my third class, because we couldn't have any live events for a while. But I did take my third class in June that same year, and I remember I took the class the one day, and the next day I was already paying my license fee to become a bars facilitator. And I had already talked to my boss about wanting to quit and work with Access, because at the time it wasn't something that it would be enjoyable for me to do both, especially because during the pandemic, no one was really like traveling.
Yeah.
And I worked at a travel agency, right? So basically it was just solving people's problems with the prior purchases.
Yeah.
And I had already talked to him, and I said, you know what, between June and July, I would like to leave. And he was like, yeah, sure. And so he helped me through everything. And it was really easy. Like everything just was flowing. And I remember my first month as a bars facilitator. Well, we're talking about money. So my first bars class, so it's a 1 day class, right? So in 1 day, I made more money than I did the entire month working in that company. My
Wow.
first month as a bars
That's great.
facilitator. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. I like that.
Did you feel like the
And
tools really supported you to be able to be yourself when you're marketing yourself? Because in Access, you essentially have to get yourself out there and be willing to be seen and willing for people to know what you're offering and all of that. So do you feel like the tools, the consciousness tools helped you with that as well?
yeah, absolutely. even like talking, to the camera or on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, and just like talking to people in real life. Like I know it doesn't look like it as much, but usually I'm very shy. Like if I don't know you, I probably won't approach you. That's how I like actually when I was a teenager, my mom put me on drama club so I could be a little more loose because I was really, really uptight sometimes. Um, and it worked apparently, but especially with the access tool, I would be a lot more comfortable just being me and also talking about access. Because when you don't have a point of view that people have to like it or that they have to take a class with you or do a session, and you're just genuinely happy to share something that you're passionate about, then it's so much easier, right? Because as essentially at the travel agency, it was a sales position, right? And so I would always be in that weird energy of like, buy from me, buy, like, there are so many agencies, but this is the best, and please help me get my commission. And with access, there's none of that. It's just, hey, there's something I enjoy, would you like to experience it? And so the tools really help me with this ease, I guess, with growing my business.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I have on my mind is that with all that's going on the planet right now, we have, for a great percentage of youth, anxiety, stress, depression being a part of a lot more people's lives if they don't have tools for consciousness. So did you find any particular tools? I mean, obviously, who does this belong to works for that, but any other tools that you can recommend for individuals, no matter what age, that are dealing with anxiety and stress and depression, the kinds of things that kind of like can pull you down? Is there something that pops for you on tools for that?
Well, getting your bars run, of course. So go find a practitioner and get your bars run. So getting your bars run means getting a session, which,
Yeah.
as Gary says, worst case scenario, you got a nice massage. Best case scenario, your whole life will change. And so, yeah, definitely that. And also, one thing that really, like, it's not a tool per se, but the access book, I get they're like a bit underrated. Like people are like, oh, I want to go to classes and all that, and it's awesome. I love access classes, but every single access consciousness book I've read gave me so many different awarenesses and tools. uh, and even like you're reading a book about money, but then you get an awareness about your relationship, and then you read, the Being You Changing the World book, and it's basically a manual to be yourself and just enjoy your life and create the life that you love. And so I guess read more access consciousness books is my
Yeah, like some other examples I might pop in there, like Being You Changing the World by Dane Here is one, but the other one is 12 Keys to Total Freedom, I think is the title,
and
with both
keys to
Gary
total freedom.
Douglas and Dane Here. And then what's the distraction one? The
Living beyond distraction.
Living Beyond Distractions, because the tools to total freedom and the distractor ones are both ones that give you everyday pieces, like especially because many people, if they're experiencing anxiety or depression, it might be recommended that they take medication. And one thing that I've never been a big fan of medication, because I kind of grew up with a holistic parent as well, and I just always, maybe I've done a lot of drugs and alcohol in other lifetimes, but I've never been very big on them this lifetime. And it wasn't until I studied these tools that I realized even with smoking pot, you need to be really aware, because I was reading a book called a book that's just come out. It's not an access consciousness book. It's written by Anelia Benz, but it's called Team Whisper. And she's talking about some kids that, you know, had a very rough start. Okay. But she's talking about the reason why staying away from drugs is, and they talk about this in access as well, is you're altering your consciousness. And in that situation, you have to be kind of doubly aware of what else might come into your field. Like in access, they have a whole section called Talk to the Entities, where we might have entities around us all the time, but with drugs and alcohol, sometimes it's easier to let them into your field and have them kind of attached to you. And it's just a tricky thing, right? Because I have a friend of mine who did ayahuasca, and it took her probably like 5 to 10 years to be able to take a normal job after that, because she whatever occurred made it very difficult for her to be able to be in this reality and do well, right? So it's not what everybody wants to hear, because it's not like it's possible for some people to benefit from plant medicine, but it's also very, very tricky area. So I myself prefer not to add that piece, just like so I prefer not to add that piece, and that just helped me get some more distinctions about why. And it's a personal choice. Everybody has to look at it and choose, but I want to be as totally conscious and aware as possible when I'm creating my life. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the thing that I love the most about access is that there is no right or wrong. There's no like, don't do this, or absolutely do this. Is what would work for you, right?
Yes.
So, and even with access, like I know people that I met through access who also take ayahuasca and all that, and it works for them and it's their choice. I personally have never tried it for the same reason that you talked about. And it's not something that I have the desire to. And the one thing actually is that before I would be curious about it, because I've always been like very curious to try new things. But I realized that being curious about it just because people talked about it, it wasn't a good enough reason for me to choose it. And so I actually, once I had the tools, I started asking, like, is this going to contribute to my life? And I got like a no, this is not really something that would contribute to my life. And so I chose not to. And again, it's just a choice, and it's just this, like right now, I could change my mind, and maybe in a few years I'll be on a podcast talking about the benefits of ayahuasca. I have no idea. This 10 seconds, I choose not to as well.
Right. Well, you brought up some other very, very basic things that people forget to do, and that is always be in the question. Like they teach, every modality has your version of this, but like a heavy light tool. So you ask, and like for me, the way I look at heavy light is I ask, and if I sense it's more expansive and it's going to expand my life, that's more like a light. And if it feels kind of like it's contracting a little bit, that's usually like a heavy for me. So like something like somebody offered me like to microdose on mushrooms, let's say, and let's say I was considering it, I could ask something like, if I choose this, what will my life be like in 5 years? And get a sense of whether it feels like it's going to expand out, or whether it's not really actually going to lead towards the targets I desire in terms of consciousness. So that part, heavy light, and then also questions. So what are some of your favorite like general questions that you use from Access?
Well, there's the one and awesome, how does it get any better? And what else is possible? I think those two like have to be mentioned. But honestly, I've always liked to create my own questions kind of on the go. Like whenever something comes up, I just sit with it and ask questions. So even like, how can I say this for someone who hasn't heard of Access before? Because then I'll go into yeah. Well, basically, so with Access, there's what we call clearings, right? Which are basically questions that we ask to clear the energies that come up with some particular situation. And so what I do is usually I ask questions to kind of clear all the limitations that even that I'm not aware that are there. And I just, go and ask those. And then I start asking questions to go towards what else is possible. So just a question like that, what else is possible with this situation? So perhaps, okay, so something that actually happened to me. This other day, I was driving back home and I parked my car and I forgot to pull I forgot how to say that in English. The manual brake, I guess it's called.
Okay.
Yeah. And my car started going backward, like going back, and it hit my garage door. And I was like, okay, interesting situation I put myself into. And that probably happened because at that moment I was kind of upset with some news that I had just gotten. So I wasn't, really, I was kind of on autopilot and I forgot to pull the brake. And at that moment, I looked at it and I was like, okay, I have two choices here. I can be pissed and blaming myself and all that, or I could just ask questions and ask for something better to show up and for it to be, for all of it to happen with ease. And so that's what I did. I sat down, like I got the car back to where it was, and I looked at the damage on my garage door, and I was like, okay, so what do I do now? Do I have to call someone? Is it something that needs to be fixed right now? That. And after all that practicality, then I went to, okay, all of life comes to me then knowing glory, and how does it get any better? What else is possible here? And well, everything was okay. Like, yes, I had to pay for someone to fix my garage door, but it could have been so much worse. And so I guess with the questions, it's not just about like this miracle thing happen. It's not like my garage door would fix itself, but it got me to a state where it wasn't the end of the world, and I didn't have to oh gosh, sorry. Sometimes I forget
Well, you
the
didn't have
words
to
in English.
you didn't have to judge yourself, but you also
Yeah.
you didn't have to, like, it changes the energy of the situation, right?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
that's the other piece that you mentioned, is that whenever you go into judgment about yourself or somebody else, you can't be in awareness. So if you're judging yourself and going like, oh, that was so stupid, blah, 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 then you just bring yourself down more of the rabbit hole. And when you bring
Yeah.
questions like, how does it get any better? What's right about this? I'm not yet getting whatever. Then your energy doesn't have to go down that hole. Instead, you can expand out, and yeah, you still need to get the garage door fixed, but how can I do it with ease and without like shutting down my world in a way that is not going to be contributive to me, Yeah.
Yeah. So honestly, well, if I had to ask, well, say another question, it would probably be like, actually, how can I be even happier and more grateful today than I was yesterday?
Mm.
That's a question that I've been asking myself every day. Because remember, when I started, when I first started with Access, the one thing that I wanted to change was that I wanted to have more joy in my life. So I wanted,
Yes.
because I didn't really feel happy in the life that I was living. And so it's something that I keep asking, how can I be happier? How can I have more joy? How can I have more gratitude as well show up in my life. And the funny thing is that the more that I ask, the more reason I have to be happier and more grateful. So I guess that's the magic with access tools is, ask and you shall receive, and it actually does.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you also mentioned that waking up grumpy, and I had this awareness with the who does this belong to thing that while I'm sleeping, sometimes I take on somebody else's or something else's reality. So if I wake up in this like mood, like I often will expand out and be like, whose reality was I in? How can I step back into the reality I choose? Like those kinds of questions too, instead of just like, oh God, I slept bad, or oh God, I'm cranky now. Like as soon as we define something like I'm anxious now, I'm cranky now, I'm this or that or whatever, it's kind of like we put it in place instead of allowing it to change. Like what I've said with people with anxiety is not even defining it as anxiety. Like if something comes up and they think, oh, I'm anxious now, I've just asked them to look at, and I'm sure you can relate to this, ask the questions like, what is this energy? What can I do with it? Do I need to be present with it a little bit for it to, to dissolve? Is it mine or somebody else's? Like really being in the question instead of defining it as something like anxiety or depression or stress or any of that, but let go of the definition and allow it to be to actually ask what you can do to change it and follow that awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, while you were talking, I remembered two other books that I highly recommend, which are the Pragmatic Psychology book by I think she's a doctor, Suzanne Mittermeier. And I think Gary is a co-author of that book as well. And the Would You Teach a Fish to Climb a Tree book as well. And with Awareness Month, it's also a really good book for you to read, I'd say.
Yes. That's one of the first ones I read because I was still teaching full time. And the whole idea of what Access calls X-Men, so people with labels like ADD, autism, OCD, LD, whatever, any label they've come up with, like, how is that also a capacity? So that's a fun book, along with Right Recovery for You. That's the other one that popped up when you were talking about pragmatic psychology by Marilyn Bradford, the Right Recovery one for anybody who's dealing with any kind of addiction or just you're addicted to making yourself wrong. That book is useful too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as I said, like Access Consciousness book, they are classes condensed in a book, basically. And there are so many tools that you can play with. And what I like the most about the book is, and even with the class manuals, I do that a lot, is that I just, when I'm, whatever's popping up, I just go and ask for the book or for the manual to contribute to me, and I open it randomly and I just get like, oh my God, this is exactly what I needed to hear. And it's really good. So it's not a tool, and yet it's a tool book. Just yeah, it's something
Yeah.
that I love.
Yeah, well, I think we're all much more magical than we realize. We've been taught there's so much that about this reality and how we've been raised that teaches us that certain things are not possible instead of everything is changeable. And what if there's a lot more, like you said, joy possible? What if there's so much more possibility than we can even imagine if we're willing to be in the question? Like another way I like to do questions is what energy, space, and consciousness can me and my body be to blank? So like before I walk into the ocean, because I know there's sharks and stingrays there, right? I'll say, what energy, space, and consciousness can me and my body be to be aware of everything around me when I'm in the ocean? Same thing when before I get on a horse or whatever, that you're putting yourself back into the present instead of distracted, like we were talking about before. So is there something that we didn't cover that you would like to share this interview in terms of like anything that you you know, like you covered a lot of different tools, but anything that you wish that people knew at a younger age that we haven't covered, or anything at all that would be something that you still think would be a contribution to share?
Yeah, I'd probably say don't take yourself so seriously. Like, and don't like life is not as serious as school and your job or whatever. It's not that serious. What if you could put more fun into it? And what if you could follow your knowing? Because I remember when I was younger, like when I was a teenager, especially in school, there's this whole teenage reality where you're making yourself wrong all the time and you're comparing yourself to everyone else. And I would always ask myself why I can't be like everybody else, or like why can I not be like my friend or my classmate or something. Like I always felt like there was something wrong with me because I wasn't like everybody else. And I always thought that that was wrong. And when I started with Access, I realized, you know what? I actually don't want to be like them. I like myself and I like the gift that I am. I just hadn't recognized it yet. So, I guess, yeah, don't beat yourself up for not being like everybody else if that's your case. Instead, just celebrate
Yes.
and celebrate you and have fun. Like, what if you were having too much fun to notice if anyone is judging you? That's something that I think Gary says in the bars manual. And there's a really funny story actually that I heard long before Access, but it was about a girl who, like, their friends were talking about bullying,
Yes.
and they were like, "Hey, you must have been bullied in school because you're like all weird." And she was like, "No, I don't really remember being bullied." And then one of their friends said, "Well, maybe you were, but you were so distracted having fun, but just being the weird you that you didn't realize." And when I read that sentence in the bars manual, that question of what if you were having too much fun to notice that people were judging you, I remembered that story and I was like, oh yeah, what if we could be so happy and have so much fun and be so distracted that we wouldn't even notice that people were judging us. And yeah, I guess that's my piece of advice here.
Right. Yeah. I would say choosing your own reality, right? If your own reality is like if you want to live by other people's judgments, of course you're always going to be unhappy, right? But if you choose your own reality, like I'm just having so much fun that if people don't like it, oh well, like I'm just gonna keep being yourself, instead of trying to be like anyone else, like you said. So very well said. So I'll make sure that I put your link to your profile in the Access Consciousness website. And if there's any, I mean, from that link in the show notes today, but if there's any other things that you want to, added to that as well, you can let me know. But it's been a pleasure hearing your perspective on how to use consciousness tools for everyday life in a joyful way. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank
And
you. I had lots of
and
fun.
thanks for being you. So that's it for today for Growing Up Conscious. Bye, everyone.